I am in my game room. It is the day after I was at a pickup game in the local friendly game store where I played an MSU German list. And I wanted to show you a bit of the gameplay that happened because I think there's maybe tactical lessons that can be learned from that. Um, the link to the video where I explain my list will be in the description. And I was playing. I won the game, by the way. It turned out to end 3-1 in my favor in objectives, and kill points was something like 11-7 or something like that. It was a very bloody game, and it was a very good game. Playing MCU, you lose a lot of units. That just happens every single time. Anywho, let me show you the setup, and this is basically what played out in one flank of the game. Right, let me just check if you guys can see that. Yeah, that sort of works. Okay, so the forces involved were he had an LVT. Double machine gun LVT. It was an American force. I don't really own American, so I'm just using these Brits. He had 2 machine gun teams, medium machine gun teams. And he had a 3-man officer unit, regular with SMGs. Okay? So 4 units. And this was the extreme right flank of my deployment. I dedicated 3 units to this flank. But it did it in a very specific order. So the first thing that I deployed was an MMG team. And then I deployed a 6-man unit of Cossacks, mounted Cossacks, regulars. And then finally, after everything else had happened, I deployed my ace in the hole, my large 8-man unit of mounted veteran Cossacks. Very expensive, but also very, very good. So I dedicated 3 units, he had 4. Let me show you how it all played out then. I'll just clear out the board of all these units, and I'll place them where I place them in real life. So, I had gotten the first dice, and the first thing that happened was I took my MMG team, because we were doing a first wave deployment. So I ran my MMG team up behind this forest. This is the objective that we're both fighting for in this sector here. And so I knew I wanted to be able to see the objective but not be seen unless he drove on the very far flank. Then I was sacrificing my MMG. Nothing to do about that. If he really wanted to, he could have killed me up here. I'm not sure it would have been a good idea though, but that's one thing he could have done, right? So I ran my MMG team in here. Now we both deployed in the center of the table and on the other flank as well. He had a lot of armor. I didn't really have anything to deal with all of that armor, although I did end up killing both of his tanks. One of them got a light mortar straight down the hatch and died that way, and the other one got bazookaed. Panzerschrecked. Anywho, he mounts up both his officer and his 2 MMG teams in the LVT, and then he makes his first move. At that point, he has gotten his first order dice, and he's like, okay, I want to get to the objective, but how do I get there? There are 2 ways to get there right now. He could have moved up along this hill, down the hill, as far as he can go, to somewhere around here. That would have maybe given him a shot down at my MMG team. Possibly not, but possible. Or he could go the safe route and go up behind these trees where I couldn't really shoot at him with the rest of my reserves coming in. He chooses the safe route, but he also chooses to run, which is maybe a key mistake here. Because he runs all the way up, staying behind the hill. It was something like 16 or 17 inches. And now the rest of his guys inside the LVT, they can only go down. So when he gets the next order dice, they go down. because he can't do anything else. At that point, I know that this objective here is very likely to become mine. So I give him options. Something that I learned from studying real war. You give your opponent dilemmas, not problems, because problems can be solved. Dilemmas, you have to choose between two bad things. So what I did was I ran my regular unit of cavalry up behind this forest, and I peeked out so that I knew I would be able to see like over here, and that forest. And then I just tried to make sure that I was covered by the forest so that anything shooting from the center of the board couldn't really get to me. He had deployed a Sherman in the center of the board, so I really didn't want to be shot at by that Sherman. And I avoided that. And the final dice of the turn, the final thing I did was to deploy my veterans over on this flank as well. They also ran up, peeking out of behind this forest here. And I do this, I'm showing you this, right? I do this formation where I sort of snake behind the forest in order to get the soft cover save. I know cover saves for cavalry is not that great, right? But it is there. So that was the first turn, that was the deployment. At this point, I am feeling very confident. I'm wondering if you guys can see why at home watching this on TV. So, we go into the second turn. Second turn comes up, and he pulls a dice, and it's one of his. So the first thing he does, he is like, okay, I'm going to have to push up and deploy all my stuff and get those cavalry out of the way. He knows cavalry can recce, so I think perhaps he was expecting me to do so. He pushes the LVT a little bit forward into the forest so it can see out and it can shoot at me without me gaining cover saves from that forest at least. Although I did have cover saves for the other two forests. He then split fires one machine gun at this unit of cavalry and one machine gun at this unit of cavalry. Now, the safe play would of course have been to recce these two units of cavalry, but that would have wasted their turns. I didn't want to do that, and I knew he had made a very, very bad mistake with what he had just done. So I stay, and I was lucky. I got a little bit lucky. Like, he has 3 shots with each machine gun, right? So 3 shots, he hits with 2, and he misses both of the 2 wounds. So he gives a pin to one unit. The other one he hits with 1 on the veterans, and he doesn't get the kill, so he also gives 1 pin to them. So I'm only pinned. Both of these units are only pinned. I was very, very happy about that. Because the next die that is pulled from the bag is one of mine. At that point, I know I have him. So the first thing I do is I charge my veteran cavalry. These are the most assured because they're veterans, so they're 10 plus. They have 1 pin. That should still be possible, right? I roll the dice. And I basically roll that. That was a 3 on live TV. So the pin goes away and my cavalry can charge. Now, because they're Cossacks, they have fieldcraft. So I charge straight through the area terrain into his LVT, forcing him to dismount one of the units that haven't done anything yet. Forcing that unit out. And he, of course, pushes out one of his medium machine gun teams. Which, in due course, I absolutely saber to bits. I think I lose 1 guy in retaliation, but I completely demolishes his machine gun team. So they are gone, and I lose 1 dude. And we pull one of his dice from the bag. Now, consolidation. I roll, and I believe I rolled a 5. So I consolidate up and onto the objective, so that I hold that. And make sure that I am in the area terrain here, like we had ruled that the lakes here were rough ground, but soft cover for infantry. So a 6+ save for my cavalry dudes, that's, you know, still worth it. I can live with that. Now, next dice is pulled, and it's one of his. So what does he do? Well, he wants to retaliate. So he pulls out his officer and helpers. Now this, again, I think is a mistake. And again, I'm wondering if you can see why. He has 3 men, they're regular. They have SMGs, so they can shoot like 6 shots. That's not nothing. But he has to pull them out quite far away from where the action is, because he doesn't want to be seen by those cavalrymen. So he pulls them out over here, where they can still shoot at me. But he's quite far down here. He measures, and he's lucky enough. He was just inside a 6. And then he opens fire. I lose again. I lose 1 guy. Takes a pin. Remove 1 guy. And at this point, it doesn't really matter who dies, because, I mean, 1 pin and 6 veterans, that's still very, very deadly, right? Next dice that comes up is me. And I charge my regular cavalry. And now I can't roll. They make it. So again, I charge the LVT because there's 1 unit in there that haven't gone. 1 MMG that haven't done anything yet. I force it out. And I absolutely demolish that in close combat as well. Again, losing 1 cavalryman in the process. At this point, I recce the cavalry as well. And they end up over here, because at that point, whatever he had in the center couldn't really threaten me. So I just wanted to be closer to his LVT to make him take the morale test. The final few dice, so he has now lost 2 order dice, and I am now completely sure that my MMG is not going to be threatened, so I move it out so that 1 guy is peeking out, can see the LVT, the rest are in cover, so that the LVT team has cover. This can now stand and shoot at the LVT, giving it pins and potentially helping force a morale failure and helping it run away. So that was turn 2, a catastrophic turn for my opponent at this point. I am now up by 2 kills, and none of my units have been seriously damaged, whereas his flank is rapidly collapsing. Next, what's happened? We go into turn 3. I have 3 dice on this flank. He has 2. The rest of the combat is going on at the same time. No one really dies, but we're exchanging shots all over the board, and like keeping each other at bay from different objectives. I go for a center objective with a unit of veterans, which I end up taking, and yeah. So we go into turn 3. Turn 3, I am up, right? I started my army, I had 17 order dice, he had 16. So I'm already up by a couple of dice, and of course, I get the first one. And again, there's only one thing to do. I am inside of 6. I already know this because he measured last turn, right? I already know that I'm inside of 6. So, I of course call another charge. Oh, and by the way, his LVT, it made his morale check for staying in combat, so. I call the charge. I assault his officer. Again, that close combat goes on really quickly. And because I am Cossacks, I'm skill riders, I can just ride through all that difficult terrain, ignoring that. Again, I lose 1 guy in the close combat, but I have 6 veterans, he has 3 regulars. It was never going to go his way, even though he did have tough fighter. I cut them down, lose 1 guy, consolidate. At that point, I consolidated up onto the hill, because even though it was rough ground, my skilled riders ignore all of that, so it doesn't really matter. I put them on the hill, way in range of the LVT if I want to go for that one, in range of potentially going down into his back lines. At that point, he feels like he has to do something about my cavalry, so he shoots at the cavalry over here with a tank in the center, and I immediately wreck them away. Out of line of sight, through the terrain, away they go. So at that point, I have spent 2 of my order dice. He has 1 order dice left on this flank. I open up with the machine gun, pinning his LVT. His LVT, though, makes his order test and shoots at both of my cavalry units. He gives a pin to this unit, and he kills 2 dudes in the other unit. So my regulars are now down to 3 men. My veterans are still a 5-man unit. Turn 4. Again, I have 3 order dice. He has 1. His flank is in free fall, but he still has an armored vehicle. That is very, very tough to kill. I haven't got anything here that has penetration value, but I do have 5 veterans. The dice are pulled. I get the first one because now I'm up by quite a lot. Right, I have 3 of killed of his out on this flank. He has none. And I call another charge. He shoots me as I'm charging. Doesn't matter. He doesn't kill anything. So I end up having another pin. Now, why did I call that charge? Because he's open topped. If I get enough hits to actually do damage, he's automatically dead. So I roll, and I get, it didn't turn out this way then, but I get 3 hits. 3 hits is enough because he has 7+ armor. And I roll, and I roll a 6. He is dead. He didn't even do anything that turn. Well, he did fire at me, but he immediately dies. My cavalry are then free to jump over here where they're protected behind that forest. And from there on in, both of these cavalry units rushed down his back line into his center, started threatening his vehicles. He had a jeep, he had a bazooka team, he had light mortars, all of that. The cavalry was just free to roam down the back line. And in the end, let me just pull you up here. In the end, my cavalry here, these 2 cavalry units, ended up surviving, both of them, by the way. No, one of them actually died because they ended up in front of a tank. I couldn't wreck here away far enough. So the regulars end up dying, but only after they've charged 2 times and killed 2 small units. The veterans survived and ran all the way to the other flank at one point. So cavalry, maybe especially the Cossacks, with their ability to run through terrain, was really useful and really key here, because he was not allowed to get defensive obstacle for any of these charges, because I was just running straight through the terrain, and I was still charging 18 inches each single charge. Most of my charges actually went through terrain. It was extremely useful. And with 3 units, I absolutely demolished his flank. He had, what did he have? The LVT is 105 points, 100 points for the MMG teams, and then the officer, so he had 200 and something points. I had maybe a little bit more. My veteran unit, it was expensive, 144 points. So I may have a little bit more because my MMG cost 50 points, right? But still, the objective was secured. Afterwards I ran my MMG team up and put it on it in turn 5 because nothing else to do. There was nothing on this flank. This flank was cleared. I think perhaps there were some crucial mistakes made on my opponent's part. That rush with the LVT, if he had just advanced instead, and then he could have unloaded his MMG teams. Now, they would still have been charged, the MMG teams, but then at least he would have had a chance to do defensive fire against me, right? As it was, he pushed up too far with something that wasn't really suited for pushing into the center table. The MMG teams are backline holders, right? And I used mine as a backline holder, as it stayed back here, right? It only pushed out when I knew I was more or less secured. And I knew I had other stuff to threaten the LVT. That was when I pushed out my MMG team and started shooting, not before. He also put his officer in danger in order to try and kill some of mine. And that's bloodlust. That's, again, a mistake, I think. And I'm not crapping on my opponent. He was a really nice guy. But he was a new player. So he made mistakes. And we talked about many of these things afterwards. And during game, by the way. I gave him a lot of hints and pointers. So I think that there may be potentially something really good if you have the right table. This was, by the way, at least this end of the table was perfect for my cavalry with all these forests and rough grounds. Perfect for my Cossacks, right? So I knew I wanted to deploy them here, and I knew whatever happened on his end, I still wanted my Cossacks to be here, right? Had he pulled in a Sherman, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to kill that. I wouldn't have been able to kill it. But I would still have been able to run up and at least take the objective, and he would have had to push infantry up to take it off me then. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this tactical talk through. I don't know what was the lesson here, but I think there was one. Yeah, that was it. See you next time.